Wow, okay, so coming after Don on stage is a bit of a tough ask, I have to say, because he managed to cover in about 20 minutes my entire research agenda for the last decade. But what I'm going to show you now in the next 20 minutes is just a brief portion of that. And it's about people, and people, really. And I know Don doesn't like people, but I kind of like people. And I think it's important to discuss how people actually act in the economy and how the firms that they work for are better or worse because of them. So my slogan is that people are people too, okay? And I'm going to be talking about this work, which is joint with Anastasia Fedek, economics researcher at Harvard University in the Business School. And let's begin. So I talk about people. But if you look at the finance literature over the last 10 years, 15 years, you'll notice that people are discussed quite rarely. People are discussed in terms of the very highest management layer of the company. Most of the time we talk about the CEO, but sometimes we talk about other C-suite members as well. So, for instance, there is research showing that CEOs that have more risky hobbies on the weekend tend to make riskier decisions in their firms. Also, recently at the American Finance Association this year, I saw that we've kind of reached the pinnacle in terms of what CEOs do, which is research in the width of CEO faces, which may have something to do with the amount of testosterone they were exposed to during adolescent years, which may or may not affect the way they make decisions for their firms. So we've really pushed the boundaries of what's possible here, right? But there's got to be more to it. Because the CEO is just one of the employees in the firm, all right? And if you're talking about a firm that has 10, 20, 50,000 employees, right, the huge GEs and IBMs of the US economy, that one person does not have the same power as the skills and the willingness to work and the experience of the rest of that workforce. So what we've been doing is, through a very novel data set, or at least emerging data sets that are available that talk about individuals and how they interact within firms, the career choices that they make, the education they had, the skills that they have learned, where they go, and who they are, we try to better understand the dynamics of the firms. And by understanding the dynamics of the firms, we try to gain a little more information also about the economy at large. So specifically, we've been working with a data set from a client relationship management company which does wide-scale global acquisition of data. So they scrape, they buy, they enter into partnerships with companies, they take in client relationship management data, and they spit out better client relationship management data. But I don't particularly care about client relationship management. What I care about is the fact that they cover 1.4 billion job changes that have happened on planet Earth since about the 1970s. Okay, so for those of you who think about that for a minute, that means in the 1970s we don't have too many data points, but as you go further and further and further up till today, what you find is that we have about 40 to 50% of job changes in the US covered, right? And it's a data set that you can actually go back and test hypotheses over a long time horizon. Within that, around 344 million people, right, which covers around 40% of the US workforce, but also on a global basis, have basic profiles, basic details that are rich enough for us to understand who they are. Out of those, 262 million people have actual employment histories and employment profiles that are useful to us. Useful to us in understanding how people move between firms, although the full set is useful to us in terms of understanding who people are and how they act. And people move about quite a bit. Right? So people tend to move about between firms, and people tend to have different roles throughout their career. Just to give you an example so that you have something in mind, here is a profile that I made up, okay? Because I didn't feel that showing you a real person's profile would be particularly a good idea with GDPR coming in and so on. But what we have here is very noisy, right? Okay, it's in purple and it's in a JSON message, and it's in an ugly font so that you feel that it's not as cute and neat as you might want it to be. But this person's profile comes from the aggregation of data at the resume level, at the online profile level, at the level of people scraping and aggregating news, right? It's a lot of different sources, and it's a lot of different information types, and it's not clean. As we heard just now, people lie on their resumes, right? Well, people inflate their job titles on their resumes, right? So job titles here are kind of made up by the person to sound like they want to sound. Well, the company name as well. So Caterpillar here, which is a company we all know, right, has thousands of employees. Well, in our data set, we have literally thousands of instances of names of companies that contain Caterpillar, about 50% of which actually relate to this Caterpillar, the company, and the rest over a long tail of other companies that contain the word Caterpillar, right? So immediately, there's an opportunity to leverage natural language processing and more sophisticated machine learning techniques in order to build a more enriched version of this data set. So a quick example, just to give you a feel for what we do, we take a lot of additional information, right? So market information, we look at the web to find information about companies. We try to discern how the other features of employment might relate to the company that somebody's talking about in their profile, and how that might relate to a canonical or real-world entity that actually does stuff in the economy. And if we can't do it, then we ask people on mTurk to do it, or on other distributed platforms that can gather information. We have, obviously, fuzzy matching techniques. We have cascading statistical matching techniques that are hierarchically based. And ultimately, again, we can drop back in order to augment our data to people who go out and research this for us. And what we managed to do is, over this resume data, for US public companies, just to give you an example, but this holds globally over everything, we match about 97% of our sample correctly. So our precision is about 97%. Our recall is about 93%, which means we do really well on making sure that we get the right company for somebody's resume and for somebody's employment history. And if you compare that to, say, recent work that's happened on LinkedIn data, this covers about twice the number of US public firms, right? So it's actually useful for economic analysis, and it goes back much further in time. So we also have companies that now don't exist, but which might still be useful to know about, because otherwise we end up with survivorship bias and other sources of noise. So here's what we get once we've actually enriched the data, right? So we start with something extraordinarily noisy. Now we know the exact location of this person. So we can ask, is Belo Horizonte, right, where this person actually was living, or they were living nearby Belo Horizonte, is it in Brazil? In which administrative area is it? Under which regulations does it fall for the water sewage system? I'm not sure why that would be particularly helpful, but bear with me. We can infer actually the year of birth, so the age of these people, gender, ethnicity, right? We can also go into the job titles and tie them back to the Bureau of Labor's dictionary of occupational titles and functional roles. We can start to understand which company they work for, right? And when you think about the aggregation of all of these things, it starts to become even more powerful, right? So it's not just about one person and the transition that they have through their career. It's about the conjunction of people working in different roles, moving from one role to another, from one firm to another, and how they actually grow in their career. So what we can start to do is build the graph of how people move about, right? With the ultimate goal of understanding how organizational hierarchies are built, how firms are changing over time, and how the different composition of the labor market might affect these firms and might affect industries and higher level things. So just to give you an idea, how do we build a graph of how people are moving about the labor force and organizational charts of companies? And by the way, if you go to IBM and you ask them, hey, can you give me a printout of your organizational chart, on big paper where I can see who reports to whom? Well, they'll have some strong words for you before they kick you out of the building, right? So, and yet this information is important, because if IBM creates an entirely new department, hiring for a particular skill set, you guys want to know about it, right? If IBM is gearing up to create new types of products for new types of verticals, you want to know about it. If IBM has just had a whole team of researchers leave because they don't like the place, or because the company has shifted its focus away, we also need to know about it, and we need to know how these actually are important in the short term and in the long run. So we take the view that we can reconstruct this hierarchy by using the edges that are implicit within this data and going with job transitions, connecting them together. So we assume that a previous experience is indicative of or allows somebody to transition to a future experience that happens immediately thereafter, right? So in this instance, job B overlaps, so we don't connect it. And we go along and we build on top, and we have multiple people going through the same job titles, the same companies, the same departments, and we build up the edges that we're most confident about until we get to a hierarchy that we understand as being the most likely depiction of a company on one particular month, right, out of all the years, and we reconstruct this hierarchy going back in time so that every month we can see the snapshot of how this company has been changing from one month to the next. And what we can start to do, well, we can start to amuse you by pulling out some examples of what we see when we build this hierarchy. So here we have a very important role in society, the senior pastor. We have a lot of them in the data set, right? 65,000 or so. These people are predominantly male, which you might expect, right? Given the kinds of issues that we've heard about in terms of kind of in religious institutions, the gender balance and so on. They're 38 years old on average, and they spend about 10 years in this position. Interestingly, they were pastors before, and they spent time at seminaries during their education. Okay, interesting. And one might say, okay, well, poor choir boys. But let's move on to the next one, managing directors. Now, I see, based on my research, managing directors are kind of the senior pastors of the financial markets. So here, instances should actually be much larger. What I did is, this is the number of managing directors that worked at these 5 firms in 2008, because for a different project, we were looking at a case study of Lehman Brothers collapse. And so we were tracking particular managing directors that worked at these firms in 2008 within actually a sample of our data set. So don't mind that number. Again, the number of male colleagues in managing director positions seems pretty similar to senior pastors. And actually, if you look around the room, you might see that this is reinforced a little bit. The average age is around the same as well, but they spend much less time in these positions, and that's usually because they jump about to other managing director positions, trying to make it to partner and into higher positions. Also, bachelor's degree, right? So as machine learning researchers and data scientists and so on, and as wanting to build more of these technologies into financial markets, we might ask whether we might not want more people with the technical training at a high level to be also managing these firms at a higher level, at least kind of somewhat permeating this so that we can make decisions both scientifically and from a business level. And keep that thought in mind for a couple of minutes from now. Okay, so now that we've built this graph, now that we see how people are moving about, we can also start to see how people move between firms. Okay, and movement between firms is interesting because it allows us to also study industry moves and allows us to see whether that falls under our normal understanding of how industries work, because human capital might not fit your normal understanding of an industry, right? Where do employees of Amazon move to? I get a different answer every time I'm in a room. Anybody want to shout out some names? No? Okay. Sorry? Google, yeah, well, some people do go to Google. It's not on this list. But what might be very surprising is that 1/5 of people that leave Amazon go to Microsoft, right? That's interesting. Well, of course, they're in Seattle. No brainer. But still, 20% of the people who leave Amazon go to Microsoft, 2% go to Starbucks. And I'm pretty sure that's not just for coffee, okay? But maybe we just see a continuous loop going into Starbucks from all companies. Okay, also UPS is down there. Now look at, oh, you can't read this. It's not particularly high resolution. But here we show the movement within industries, okay? And this is done in 2016. So manufacturing we have on the bottom, finance, information, public administration, education, and so on. This is US public companies with their industries and looking at movements in 2016. So it's only the people who actually move jobs in 2016 that are being captured here. Now, what you see is what proportion goes back into industries. So industries that are more specialized, right, have a higher proportion of people who stay within that industry. They're less mobile. Industries that are less specialized, like the information industry, have a much lower proportion of people that stay within industry. And they actually go and filter through the rest of the economy, right, which is what you guys are seeing with data scientists right now, is that they're filtering into the firms and poisoning the waters and trying to get you to do different things in different ways. Now, we talked about skills before, because people have different skills, and people's skills are important in determining how these firms do what they do and whether they're capable of doing certain things. So overall distribution of skills, again, you can't read, but you can see fairly good distribution over a set of skill sets here that we create using kind of hierarchical topic modeling approach. Now, manufacturing. You'll see that there are some spikes on electrical engineering, manufacturing, process management, software engineering, technical product management, right? This is industry 33. Industry 33, manufacturing, we should expect that skills are pretty sticky, right? If you're in manufacturing, then it's less likely you're going to move and filter into other industries. Finance, even more located on just 2 or 3 particular skill sets: banking and finance, accounting, and so on. Now, what we want to do is actually use this understanding of skills in the employment landscape to see whether there are correlations, and we can argue whether they're causal or not. Hopefully you'll agree with me that there is some evidence for that, that skills and the proportion of skills that there are in a certain firm might impact firm performance. Okay. So what we do is we take, for each firm and for each skill and for each month, we look at the proportion of employees with a particular skill set, right? And as I said, these skill sets are taken from a distribution of skills, which is about 50 skills. And these have been classified, and they fit very nicely within kind of the various taxonomies that you might want to refer to for skill sets. And they're drawn both from resumes and from online testing devices and from other areas. We then orthogonalize these to book-to-market ratio, industry, performance in the current month. And we try to do a predictive regression with a lag, right? And why is the lag important here? The lag is important to introduce some aspect of this causal capturing, right? So we do 1-month lag, 3-month lag, 6-month lag. It's robust to all of these different approaches. And what we're trying to do here is understand to what extent the proportion of skills and the change, so a 10% change in each skill, means what. So what we find, interestingly, is that there are some skills that are consistently over our entire sample since 1990 for this particular test, but also going a little bit further back. And for each month, a 10% change in one of these skill sets within a particular firm for sales, CRM, and sales management is positive, and it's highly statistically significant. Okay, and this was lagged again, right? So it means that this is happening in the months following. Now, what I completely agree with is the next slide. And I think you might not, but what I found in my experience working in large companies is that these increase in these kinds of skills tends to have a very negative impact, actually, on the ability to be productive and effective as an organization. I'm not sure if the panelists from earlier would agree, but this is what I have found, and highly statistically significant. Now, what I want to do, just to leave you with something that you can point to, right? Because what would a presentation be here without a trading strategy, is to look at something very simple, right? Because I don't want to, there's just so much that you can do with this data set, and so much to start thinking about people in the economy, that I don't want to belabor it too much. But let's just look at a simple measure of employee turnover, right? Where more turnover is bad, hypothetically, and less turnover is good because you have a more stable company, right? More turnover means people don't want to work there for very long. They keep moving on. So we do the same as before, except now it's an abnormal employee turnover measure, orthogonalized to all the same variables, including the past returns, right? And we build a portfolio where we basically short the top quintile and long the bottom quintile. And what we find is that the monthly excess return is 1.12% before trading costs. Now, I haven't actually This was literally finished last week, so we can talk a little bit more about it offline if you're interested in seeing how we did everything. But this is quite interesting, in my opinion. This is the first thing that we tried, and because it kind of made sense from a very initial perspective, but something to think about. Now, in conclusion, what I'm saying is that people matter, right? And not just the CEO, not just the top levels of management, all people. And now we're actually able to see evidence that this is the case. We're able to measure it, and we can take that further, and we can do all kinds of really interesting experiments, right? Which might also be interesting for your own work. So if you are interested, if you have ideas, if you have comments, if you want to, see if there are ways to partner in some way, please reach out to me, and I'll be around. And thanks for your attention.
We probably have time for just one question. So, okay, right here, right in the middle. Thanks.
Hi. How do you distinguish a 10% change in one thing causes a 7/100th of 1% of change of another? The 7/10,000th. Isn't that noise? I mean, your numbers were 0.07%, 0.08%. That's noise, unless it's per month.
It's per month. First of all, yes, it's per month. Second of all, 0.07% is the return change month over month, and average volatility of the stock of a stock every month is not that high, right? You're not going to see numbers in the single-digit percentage.
Right, but this was 2 charts back. It wasn't the returns; it was the effect on the organization, wasn't it? It wasn't basis points, which is fine, but
You're here?
yeah, a difference in performance isn't that? That's not return performance, is it? That's some sort of other measure, and it was the one before that too.
No, this is the return performance.
Oh, that's the return. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, it's much clearer in the paper. Here, I was trying to, in the interest of time, be propagandist and tell you that these things are bad, but we've done it with several robustness checks in the paper itself, and we can definitely talk more about the specification.
And Jan is over there.
Yeah?
And Don. Where's Don? He's healed.
Yeah. Hire, fire, right? Just simple strategy. Short, long these, short the other guys.
How did finance professionals stack up?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It varies also by industry, and we've done tests that isolate this industry by industry. So if you're interested, we can share the paper, and you can see that. I forget now if we ran specifically a test. It probably wasn't that interesting in terms of finance professionals. I tried to cherry pick some more interesting examples for this.
Great, thank you. Thanks, James.
This is RavenPack.